tell you a story, opening with a story that happened a couple of years ago. I was at the beach with my family. We were having a great time. My son was about 3, 4 years old. My daughter was 1, 1.5, and my son wanted to build a sandcastle. Anybody like sandcastles? I know that some of you like to, when you go to the beach, you don't want to just lay out and just read a book or play in the water. You want to be doing something, right? Making something, whatever. My son is that way. He is totally active. And so at 4 years old, he's very particular at this point in his life. He's still particular, but definitely particular back then. And so he asked, Dad, can we make a sandcastle? Sure, right, okay. I just want to sit there and read a book and be lazy. So we get the sand right, and we start making the sandcastle, and we do a big moat around it, and we're building up this little thing. I'm not thinking too much of it. He's taking those little, back then he had these monster cars, and so he'd take these monster trucks and go over the hills, and he thought he was the king of the ocean. And we're having the best of time. And a little bit of time goes by. I'm starting to get sunburnt. I'm starting to get tired of being out in the beating sun. And so I want to kind of go back in, and the rest of the family, I'm kind of talking to me, come on, let's go. So I do something really dumb. I go over to the sandcastle, not thinking anything of it, and I kick the sandcastle domes over. In that moment, my son looks, and he just freaks out. Why, Daddy, why? And I'm just thinking, dude, I just knocked it over because, for me, it's kind of fun to knock sandcastles over, am I right? Plus, I don't want to, leave this big tripping hazard for somebody to walk through later and Granny fall over my sandcastle that I built. I'm trying to help people, right? So my son freaks out, and he demands, Daddy, we have to rebuild it. And as a good father, I get back out there, and I rebuild that sandcastle over again, and we left it just like it was and let the water do its thing. It comes and knocks it over and does its thing, right? And I should have just left it alone, but I had to destroy it because that's what dads do, right? They want to break stuff and mess stuff up. And I realized something about my son that's true for every single person. When something gets destroyed in life, especially something that we loved, something we grabbed hold of, we want to rebuild it. We have a desire deep down for it to be rebuilt, for it to be restored. And it's everything from a simple DIY project at your house, right? Say something happens to the house, the water busts into the ceiling. I know a family recently who had this big water damage in their house, and it tore up half of their house. It's crazy. Well, they went in, they had a company come in and do a renovation project, got new flooring, made it look even better than it was before the damage. That's just kind of what we have in our DNA. What about Lego creations or something you built as a kid, right? You build these things, and maybe somebody breaks your toy, and you want to fix it, or you want to buy an even bigger and better toy. You want to replace it, rebuild it, make something new again. And this is also not just with silly things, but very sober realities as well. I know most of you now were not alive during 9/11, which is crazy. But you guys weren't alive during 9/11, most of you. But there was this, as you remember, this terrorist attack, right, that happened at the World Trade Centers. And these buildings are burning and burning and burning, and then after a couple hours, they fall down. And it wasn't until just a couple days later. I mean, it was almost immediate. But days later, people started saying, we're going to rebuild. And when we rebuild, we're not just going to rebuild back to what it was. We want to do something even greater. We want to just blow the world away with something that we can rebuild and be proud of. And that's exactly what happened with Freedom Tower, Tower 1, and it's now this massive glass structure in New York. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I've actually never been. I'd love to go one day, but I see the pictures, and it's great. And when you read through the Bible, there's so many places about building something or rebuilding something. Think of Noah's Ark, right? We think of the animals, the 2x2, all that kind of stuff, walking through the. Why did I sing that, by the way? I don't know. 2x2, da 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 da. All right, sorry. Yeah, but they're going in 2x2, right? All that kind of stuff. We have these beautiful pictures of the giraffe sticking its head out of the thing, but we never really think about how did the ark get there? I mean, God didn't just snap his fingers. He could have, but he didn't snap his fingers and just say, ark right there. No, he gave very specific construction plans to a man named Noah who had faith in God, and God used Noah and his family to build this massive ark structure, and it was for decades that he built. If you think about in the Bible, the Ark of the Covenant, it was this kind of this box, if you will, but it wasn't just a box, a container that held the tablets of stone and some other prized possessions from Israel's history in this box, and it was ornated, or you know what I'm trying to say, yeah, with gold, with plates of gold, and there was this cherubim with wings touching each other at the top. Such specific instructions. Then you have the tabernacle, which was this tent of meeting that traveled from place to place in the early history of Israel, and it was followed by the temple. Now, the temple is special. We're gonna talk about that for a second. The temple was this place where God gives instructions to his people, where God wants to meet and commune with his people. And some very specific things happen in this massive structure. This structure was so grand that it put every other building in the world at that point, and I would even say in the world today, to shame. It was so spectacular. The inside of the walls were not made with brick or drywall or clay or mud. The lining of the walls were 24-karat plated gold. It was that crazy. And they did it out of respect and honor to the majesty and holiness of God. And so they finished this temple. It was this big celebration all through Israel. They feast and dance and consecrate themselves for days. Israel knew how to throw a party back then. They finished the temple. Years pass. And of course, what happens to the human heart? The human heart corrupts the things that God is trying to do and to reject God, and they cause other nations, because of their own rejection, God's providence, his hand just lifts off of them, and other nations begin to attack to the point of enslaving Israel. Assyria attacks Israel from the north, Babylon attacks Israel from the south, and they're enslaved for many, many, many years. And at least a century goes by, and Israel is desperate to see this temple be rebuilt. It's desperate to try to do something, because now the temple, the armies have come in and completely destroyed, wrecked the sign of God's presence with his people. So the question that I have to ask when I read all this stuff is, what's the obsession of this temple? Why was it so important? Why was it so special? What's the big deal here? And I've got a video that I want to play that I think will summarize much better than I can do. Take a look at this video for just a second.
If you could go back to the city of Jerusalem during Bible times, the biggest thing you'd see is the temple.
This beautiful building was designed by King David and built by King Solomon, and they believed that it was the home of the God of the universe.
Wait, I thought God's home was in heaven.
Well, the whole point of this earthly temple is that it's the place that overlaps with God's heavenly home. The temple is where God lives and rules all creation as king.
That's cool, but even Solomon, who built the temple, didn't believe that it could contain the God of the universe, right?
Yeah, the building was just a symbol, and it pointed to the fact that all of creation is God's temple. And that's actually what the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, is all about.
Really? It says that creation is God's temple?
Well, it doesn't need to say it. The whole story shows it. In Genesis 1, God creates an ordered world out of a dark wasteland by speaking in a series of 7 days. Then on the 7th day, God's presence fills creation as he takes up his rest and rule. Similarly, the tabernacle and later the temple were built and dedicated in a series of 7 speeches in 7 days, after which the priest or king could rest and rule in God's presence.
So all of creation is where God intends to dwell. It's like his temple.
Exactly. Now, turn the page to Genesis 2 and we get another portrait of creation. This one focuses in on the land. And in the center of the land is a region called Eden, which in Hebrew means delight.
And in the middle of delight, God plants a garden in which God and humanity live together.
And that's why the temple was modeled after the garden, filled with imagery of gold and flowers. The menorah symbolized the tree of life. It's the place where God dwells with his people.
Oh, got it.
And check this out. In the temple, the Israelite priests and Levites were to work and to keep the temple in God's presence. This is exactly the job description given to humanity in the Garden of Eden.
So these humans were the first priests. But instead of ruling with God, they wanted to rule on their own terms, and they're exiled from the garden temple.
And like Adam and Eve, Israel's leaders also wanted to rule on their own terms, and they too were exiled.
The temple was destroyed, and this left them wondering, did God give up on Israel? Will God bring about a new creation?
Well, the biblical prophets anticipated the day when God would create a new temple with a new priesthood. That's when God's presence would fill all of creation.
And when the Israelites returned to the land, they did rebuild the temple.
But that temple didn't turn out the way the prophets hoped. In fact, later Israelite prophets said that this temple was hopelessly corrupt.
So they're still waiting for the ultimate temple.
And here we come to the story of Jesus.
I think that we forget how important and special Jesus is. There's so many things, imagery in the Bible that Jesus not only is portrayed as, but he completes. He does something that human intervention just cannot do. I want to look at Jesus in this story for just a second. Follow me here for a second because we're going to go somewhere, okay? When Jesus begins his earthly ministry, he announced that he's come to do two things. Very special things that we could all agree with. One, he wants to set people free physically, and he demonstrates that by miracles and taking people and looking at them and saying, you know, your sins are forgiven, or rise up and walk, your faith has healed you. All of those miraculous times in the Bible where God's come through for the physical condition of people, God wanted to send his son to demonstrate that he is for humanity. But he also came to set people free spiritually, right? The corruption and the bondage of sin that every human being carries in their heart that rips them away from a right relationship with God, Jesus comes to restore and bring back together only through him. It's an exclusive thing that only Jesus can do. So early in Jesus' ministry, he says these things, but he says a third thing that is completely scandalous and shocking, and it has something to do with the temple. And that's what I want to look. That's why we're looking at the temple for a second and looking at how people use this temple as almost like this religious, pious symbol, and no one could touch the temple. It's like, ooh, you can't touch that. That's sacred. And Jesus comes and does something and says something crazy. I want to look at John chapter 2, starting at verse 13. If you have your Bibles, open those with me. And we're going to look at something that Jesus did kind of recently in this story that is very different than the way he acts pretty much the rest of the Bible. Jesus acts kind of wild for a moment, but he did it for a reason. Let's look at what it says starting at verse 13 of John chapter 2, 13 through 16. It says, "It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifice. He also saw dealers at trade tables exchanging foreign money." Now, imagine this for a second. The temple was supposed to be this place of worship. The temple was supposed to be this place of holiness and reverence for God, and there's dirty animals, goats, doves, bird poop. I mean, seriously, like this is kind of what was filling the temple. It went from like this holy, reverent place to smelling and looking like a flea market. And it says he drove out the sheep and the cattle. Sorry, let me back up. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. Again, he acts like a madman for a second. It says he drove them out with the sheep and the cattle out, scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Wow. Like Jesus creating a whip and like slapping stuff and getting stuff, driving stuff. Oh, this does not sound like little Jesus that I know, or even the compassionate Jesus hanging on a cross. This is kind of some like ferocious Jesus, right? What is this about? Jesus was mad because of two things. One, people were approaching God in a very irreverent way, just really casual, maybe not even thinking about God at all, not caring about who God was and what was going on. And then two, people were being taken advantage of. This really made Jesus upset. People were being taken advantage of, especially those who were ignorant or poor. Why is this? Why did Jesus, really what's happening here, first of all, and then why did he do this? See, these shop owners, these people that were having this flea market going on in the temple, they were targeting people back then because this was happening around the Passover. This was a festival that was happening in Israel. Remember, I told you, Israel knows how to party. They know how to have a celebration. So this yearly annual thing, it's like Christmas, but like times 10 in Israel. People all over the world were pilgrimaging to Israel to spend time with God and to honor God as a religious duty. And so people all over the world didn't know some of the customs, and so they were being swindled. They were being put out. I remember for me, I went to Poland one time when I was in college. And in Poland, they don't have some of like the laws and the commerce stuff that they do in America, right? And this is normal for many countries. And so we went to Poland, and there was this big flea market in this abandoned soccer stadium. It was huge and actually spectacular. I felt like I was on the set of like a movie, like a James Bond movie or something. It was crazy. We're walking through, and people are trying to like sell us stuff and just get money. And I see these pair of Nikes that are great. And I look at them, and they're like, man, I've never seen these Nikes in the U.S. This is really cool. So my friend's like, man, ask him how much it is. So I was like, okay, I did. So I asked him, like, how much is it? And I can't remember the currency, but it was like, it equaled out to be like $80 in American dollars. And I was like, this is awesome. This probably sell for like 200 in the States. So I get them, and I put them on, and I'm walking. I feel like I did like the best deal in the world. And I get probably 2 or 3 days left in Poland, and the sole one time, it just rips right off. And I'm like, what is this, right? So I had to literally walk around the rest of the day with one shoe on, one shoe off. And that's kind of what you got. That was kind of the sleaziness. It was this black market deal where people were trading under the table and making a mockery of God. So Jesus grabs his whip. He goes to business. He does what he thinks is the right thing to do. Get him out of here. Stop all this stuff. You're making God into a mockery, and you're treating people unkindly. You're stealing from people. You're taking advantage of people. Stop it. So, of course, the Pharisees, the leaders of Judaism, they freak out on Jesus. They're like, what are you doing? This is what they say. They're trying to test Jesus' authority. They're trying to get at him and trick him and put him in a box. And he says something both scandalous and confusing right here. This is what he says, starting at verse 18 of chapter 2. But the Jewish leaders demanded, what are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, to drive them out, then show us some miraculous sign. Prove to us that you have the authority to do this. And Jesus says, all right, you want a sign? Destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I'm going to raise it back up. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I'm going to raise it back up. And they're like, what? It's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days? That would be a miraculous sign, wouldn't it? But Jesus, when he said this temple, he meant his own body. He says to the people there, this temple that you love, this place that you hold dear in your heart, it no longer has its value. I'm the temple. I'm the place where man and God meet. It's my life, my body, my life, where you can come and be resurrected into a new life through the power of God. It's only done through me. It's no longer done by coming to some building and offering a sacrifice. I'm going to be the sacrifice. I'm going to be the one who does the final deed that saves humanity from their sin. He says, someday you're going to destroy me. Someday, very soon, you're going to hang me on a cross. They didn't know this, right, of course. But he's saying to them, you're going to destroy this temple, this body, and in 3 days, I'm going to raise back to life. I'm going to prove to you that this temple doesn't matter. Jesus was declaring that he would be the source of connection between God and man. And when I look at other prophets throughout the Old Testament, some of these prophets, they actually say the exact same thing that Jesus is saying. They speak of Jesus in ways where he's this Messiah, this coming king. But Isaiah takes a minute and he talks about Jesus as a rebuilder, someone who's going to take things that are destroyed and bring them back up. If you were there for graduation Sunday last week, it was a scripture that I read over you. And it is appropriate to read it over us. But if we don't understand that it was first applied to Christ, it was first applied to Jesus, and then through Jesus it's applied to us, we miss the context of the verse. Isaiah writes 800 years before Jesus is even born something about Jesus. Now, I don't think he knows that it's about Jesus at the moment, but he knows it's about someone very special. Isaiah says this, "The Lord will guide you continually." Talking about Jesus, giving you water when you're dry, and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. Some of you, talking about us, through Christ, will rebuild the deserted ruins of your city. Then you'll be known as a restorer of the breach and a restorer of homes. Jesus has come to rebuild the deserted, torn down, broken places of every person who puts their trust in him. This is what Jesus is wanting to do. But the verse, again, it doesn't just talk about Jesus. It's talking about us too, that through Jesus, we have an opportunity to go back in time, grab the truths, grab the idea of Jesus, bring him into the present, and say, here's the truth of all that you're going through. That your life has been deserted, your life has fallen into ruins, your life is broken, and there's not an answer on this side of this world. And that's the whole problem that people can't wrap their minds around, that there's no answer to your problem. If you look to the left and look to the right and look behind you, there's no answer to your problem. Isn't that such a devastating truth? But for Christ. This is why I love Jesus. I'm a bit emotional today, not because something bad happened in my life. I just love Jesus. You ever just get to a point, maybe you don't, and that's okay. I would love for you to feed off of my passion for Jesus for a minute. I love Jesus because I don't have to go to some place to just sacrifice because I'm a sinner. I could go to Jesus and God saves me. God forgives me. Jesus, through his death and resurrection on the third day, offers me a better way to live, and he rebuilds the deserted ruins of my life. This is what Christianity is. This is what our faith is. It's just not some idea and some love for some individual who lived 2,000 years ago. This is a personal, specific, timely, in-the-moment relationship with the creator of the universe through his son Jesus. And anytime you need God, anytime you need a touch, anytime you need some help, you don't need to go to some temple. You don't need to go to some ruin. You go to Jesus. He's the open door to every problem that you face, and he's welcoming you in this morning. He's welcoming you in. I don't have another answer for you. This is it. It's Jesus. And so I don't know how you need Jesus this morning to rebuild those broken areas of your life. But I'm betting you, or betting myself, that there are people who do have broken places. And this is just a silly little Jenga game, but it's going to mean something in a second. This right here feels like our lives where we have stacked certain things up to try to build something for our lives. And we look at it and we think, man, that's a nice structure. And then the world comes and it just absolutely knocks it down, just busts us up, to our lives are pieces on the ground, and there's nothing to show for it. And when we look at our life, there's nothing that we have. Nothing. Maybe you need God to rebuild a relationship with Him, because it starts there. Maybe once that relationship is built and you feel today, listen, I do love Jesus. I have been saved. I put my trust in Him. Yeah, I'm having some stuff, but that's not it. There's some deeper stuff going on as well. Maybe it's a relationship with someone else. Maybe it's a someone that you loved has moved on. Someone has passed in your life, has died. Maybe it's your life just feels broken. And maybe there's something in your life right now that you've never been able to verbalize. There's not words to say it. You can't get it out. It just sits there. It's like a pain in the chest that just won't go away. And you're reminded all the time that something is wrong and I can't put my finger on it. Jesus knows what it is, and Jesus wants to rebuild that as well. No matter what the destruction is that you face, Jesus can rebuild whatever has been destroyed. He's not like the temple. He's not like the temple that is torn down and broken and discarded. You know where the temple is now? It's gone. You know that? The first temple, gone. Second temple, gone. You can't go visit it. It was demolished. You know who isn't demolished? Jesus. You know who was there before the temple was built? Jesus. You know whose life has been given, poured out as an offering for the Lord on your behalf? Jesus. He's the answer. You're not going to get a better answer. And Christianity right now is trying to find loopholes around Jesus. There are people and faiths going on that is trying to find Jesus plus things. Jesus is exclusive. That's something about Christ that I love. He's exclusive. There's no other answer but Jesus. You can't add some other God. Listen, I know there are people that love Allah, and I love those people, but Allah's not Jesus. Some wise guru on YouTube that you love, he might have a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts, a lot of knowledge, but there's no knowledge apart from Christ that will ever stand the test of time. None of it was all going to fall except for Christ. Buddha, smart guy. He had some really good proverbs. He's not Jesus. He's not Jesus. And these idols that we carry around as well, that we build up our idols in our lives, love of a sport, that you want to be the best at a sport, idol. You put sports over God, idol. You put your schoolwork getting the right grades over God, idol. You put porn in any capacity in your life, idol. You put a friendship, this codependent friendship that you have, apart from God, above God, idol. Your talents, you think they're better than God, idol. You're worshiping idols. I'm worshiping idols, and we have to cut those things down.